Good evening, everyone. It is wonderful to be here, back here, and in deep gratitude for the invitation to be sharing the study that we are going to be sharing today, but most of all, because I have here my second father, who's sitting on the front row, and can't cry, right? So I'm very thankful for being here this evening. So good evening, everyone here, the incarnate friends and the discarnate friends alike, and those who are following on the web as well. Our study today, The Dawn of a New Era, with the subtitle, It is Necessary to Wake Up, was in reality inspired by this phrase right here that we find on a letter from Paul addressed to the Ephesians, where he said, "Wake up, you who sleep, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." So in talking about the dawn of a new era, where a lot of Spiritists are talking about, not just Spiritists, but people of other philosophies and religion, talking about a defining moment where our planet is transitioning, changing in every aspect, not just physically with the changes that we see due to the natural calamities and so on, but of a moral aspect as well. We decided not to talk about the transitioning from a planet of trials and expiations or atonements to a world of regeneration, but what does it mean? What can we do to partake in the dawn of a new era? So Paul comes to us and tells us that it is necessary for us to wake up, to be awake, to be alert. But then he talks about the need to rise from the dead so that Christ can come and shine on us. In thinking about the beginning of our study, we decided to tell a little story. So there was this young man who decided to go on a trip. It was at a time where there was no car, so it was a long journey. And he arrived at this little town, a village, if you will, and he noticed that right at the entrance there was a cemetery. Now, there was no luxury in that cemetery. It was pretty plain, just the tombstones, the person's name, and the age that they lived. But then he felt overcome with emotions because everywhere he looked, he would see the name. Mary, 2 years. Joseph, 1 year. Bill, 4 years. So he figured, my goodness, only children die in this town. Since he was going on a road to see an old wise man, as usually the stories tell, it's always a young man looking for an old wise man. When he finds him, he says, "Why is it that in this city only children die?" And he said, "Well, what do you mean?" So he told him what he saw upon entering the city. He said, "My friend, people of all ages die in this city. What you saw is what is taken into account, how many years they were alive and how many years they were awake." So let's stop to think for a moment. I am 37 years old. I can tell my age before I hit my 40s, right, Michael? So I'm 37 years old, and I started pondering, of these 37 years of age, how many of these years have I been truly awake and alive? Because Paul is addressing people that are dead. So a new question arises. What is, in fact, being alive? Is it having a physical body filled with vitality? Is it a moment if we are overcome by an illness, we are aware that death may be approaching, and we're finally aware that we never really appreciated life? What is being dead? So in order for us to address what Paul was talking about, we decided to seek for Emmanuel's assistance in the book, Our Daily Bread, which actually, I don't know if you guys know, but the book Our Daily Bread has won the bronze medal nationwide in competing in literacy for Christian thought. This is pretty outstanding because it's Chico Xavier's work. And so Emmanuel, in the lesson 68, he starts addressing the teaching by Paul. He begins by saying, a large number of both old followers and newcomers to Christian circles claim to have a very hard time understanding and applying the teachings of Jesus. Some find the text to be obscure, while others persist in literary squabbles. They get upset, they protest, and reject the divine bread, which is needed by the human envelope in order to remain on the earth. He continues, nevertheless, these friends are not even aware that this is happening. They remain asleep, victims of the paralysis of their higher faculties. Can somebody give me an example of what faculties he might be talking about? Because Emmanuel is saying that Paul was addressing the grand masses, all of us. He's addressing us. So what would be some of the faculties that we have? I know you know, Sandra. Intelligence. What else? The ability to be charitable, what we do with our time, where we're putting our intelligence into practice for, and so on. Significant, sanctifying, divine invitations usually pass them by without being noticed. These distracted disciples see them as sacred events worthy of praise, but they soon forget all about them. The mind does not accept these invitations. It remains in a numbing sleep, incapable of analyzing or understanding. When he's addressing us as being numb or unaware or being unable to grasp all of the opportunities that are passing on by, one of the things that he says that we, as incarnates, should be able to answer are the following questions. The first question, what are we doing? What are we doing? Of course, it's a very individual question. Everybody can answer it for themselves. What do we want? The majority of people spend their lives not really knowing what it is that they want, searching blindly, usually for things that fulfill the immediate desires of the soul, not really paying attention to that which is important. What matters do we attend to? How do we spend our time? If we have a family, if we don't have a family, if our life is consumed by work, which is fine, but what is it that matters that we attend to in our daily lives, and for what end are we destined to? Now, as spiritists or spiritualists, we have Michael sitting here, we can say that we all know that we are immortal spirits. We know about the aspect of a future life. But we also know that a future life, although it's a consoling idea, that life goes on and we have a lot more to look forward to, especially when we are going through a hard time in our current existence, we have to be able to answer. What end are we destined to? Because a lot of times, because of the fact that we don't know what we're doing, if we don't know what we want, and if we don't know what matters we attend to, we are never going to figure out what end we're destined to. So when Emmanuel comes, and we're going to use a lot of the support from Joanna de Angelis, the Spirit Guide for Divaldo Franco, in the book Life Challenges and Solutions, which is soon coming out, we here, everybody here in the room, we are all invited to ponder upon these 4 questions. As he says here, the inability to answer these questions means that we are paralyzed. It's equivalent to saying that the majority of us are sleepwalkers. And this is what Emmanuel talks about, sleepwalking. We're eating, we're walking, we're working, we're living with each other, but we are not truly being aware of the spiritual obligations that all of us have. This is what he's addressing. And one of the things that he says is that usually when we do find ourselves awake it's because something comes to shake us up as if waking us up from a deep and profound sleep. But it doesn't have to be so hard. It doesn't have to be so hard. Let's see what he says. Shaken by the incessant currents of the river of life, they spin around in a whirlpool of events, blind, asleep, and half dead, until they awaken and get up through their own efforts so that Christ may shine on them. When we read the passage and we see that he's addressing it to all of us, and often he includes himself in it, we find that sometimes we do find ourselves numb to our reality. Sometimes it's because of a painful situation that we have just endured. It's easier to feel the numbness and not feel everything that is truly calling our attention to. Maybe it's a moment of what they call growing pains, but it's spiritual growing pains, where our soul is being invited through that difficult situation to reach one more step in the evolutionary ascension, because that's what we're predestined to, is ascending higher and higher. And he says that it's as if the soul finds itself in hibernation, completely ignoring the immortal reality of the soul. I like to say we're just simply hitting the snooze button and asking for 5 more minutes. Right? Sounds pretty accurate to say that. Joana de Angelis comes in the book Life Challenges and Solutions and says that humankind in general live in a sleep state, lethargy, and that is why people suffer the worst sickness possible, ignorance of themselves, their destiny, and the meaning of their existences. So we see people left and right falling into a pretty deep depression, sometimes searching for suicide, whether it's a direct one or indirect, as through the abuse of alcohol and other drugs or vices. And she's talking about the fact that sometimes human beings are not aware of their divine essence. Because if we are aware of our divine essence, that we are truly children of God, then we wouldn't be ignoring what we truly are. We would love ourselves so much that we wouldn't fall into the worst ill or illness that she talks about. Ignorance of ourselves, the destiny, and the meaning of our existence as well. She says that a lot of people may complain. We complain about the ills of society, we complain about what the world is going through, but we don't make an active movement ourselves to change that of what we don't like to see. So we see that wonderful phrase, be the change you wish to see in the world. I share that all the time. But when I did that study, I started saying it's a beautiful phrase, but what am I doing to change the world? Because it begins, one person only, a very little percentage. You see somebody doing something outstanding in society, and we admire it. If we see somebody doing a campaign to assist somebody who is ill, we get on the wagon to do that because we are predestined to be charitable. There is, scientists say, something within our brain, the chemical reaction when we do something good. It's the same effect as eating chocolate. I love chocolate, so I know what I'm talking about. You want more. The hormone that is released makes you want to repeat the gesture. So talking about our existence and the meaning of our existence in reality has to do with how we are proactively living, being aware in society as a whole, so that we can indeed become early risers in this new dawn of a new era. Now, I love to keep repeating the fact that all of us here, from all of the incarnations that we have ever had, this is the coolest. Let me explain. We are in a moment of transition, where our planet is modifying, it's changing, and we can actively participate in it so that we can become part of it when it is transformed. This is pretty outstanding if you think about it. Now, this is not going to happen tomorrow, might not happen 50 years. There's not a defining moment, But Bezerra de Menezes, Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, the spirit guide, says, really, we are only about 1 minute after midnight in this transition, so we have a long night to go through. But it calls upon us to be early risers, to work, and not maintain and not stay asleep. And although it's hard, because we have been accustomed through many existences to stay in this position of numbness, of sleepness, due to the fact that we are still evolving, they tell us that it's reality. It's the moment that we are going to have situations that is going to call upon us to wake up from this deep sleep. Emmanuel continues, the moment inevitably arrives when individuals are induced to either awaken or remain dead to reality. In order to awaken from their heavy sleep, they must make every effort possible to break the chains of self-pity and unhappiness, self-depreciation, and self-disrespect. Let's talk about Paul for a second. Who here has read the book Paul and Stephen? Okay, if you haven't read the book, who knows about Paul before he was Paul? Who was he? Saul. What did Saul defend? What was he defending before he converted on the road to Damascus, on Damascus? What was he defending so wholeheartedly? Moses' law. So he wasn't wrong at that moment of his existence. That's what spoke to his heart. But then it came a time where, when he was traveling, what happens to him? He has that, I can only imagine that if I had, happened to me what happened to Paul, I would explode. Jesus right there, right? And it's such a mega transformation. Now, what would have happened to Paul if he decided then, instead of like staying awake, really, if he was consumed by self-pity and depreciation, by the wrongs that he committed, when at a moment of his existence seemed to be the right thing for him to do? He wouldn't be the person that we admire today. Let's look at Mary of Magdalene. People up to today throw stones at her, and I find her to be the most beautiful example in the gospel, that we can all actually find certain similarities in our existences from her own lessons. What would have happened if she found herself awake but feeling unhappy, discouraged, having a moment of self-disrespect? She would never have become the mother in humanity that she was invited to do, and then taking upon, being encouraged by the Master to serve, to love, and to be everything that we adore about her. So, Emmanuel brings it closer to us. Sometimes life wakes us up and we feel embarrassed by the way we were living or by the way we were acting. And there comes a moment that we have to realize we made a mistake, and we're going to make many more, unfortunately, and that's how we learn, and that's okay. But we have to have a look of self-compassion, self-respect, an understanding that we were simply evolving. We made the wrong choice. Now that we are aware of the wrong choice, it is up to us to stay in it, asleep and dead, hibernating, hitting the 5-minute button, the snooze button, or being encouraged. Because according to Emmanuel, or according to Paul, we would rise from the dead so that Christ could light his shine upon us. And that's a very defining moment in our existence as well. When Paul talks about the need to rise from the dead, he says that the value of awakening our consciousness is of the utmost value for us, because when we're talking about being asleep, he talks about a form of death. Now, it's symbolically because he's talking about wasted educational opportunities. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about a waste of enlightening, therapeutic, and enriching opportunities that life brings about, whether it's a positive situation or whether it's a negative one. And often, to shake us up and wake us up, it's usually a painful one. It's usually a painful one. Joanna de Angelis, in this same book, talks to us about the need to be warned of not being just awakened intellectually, but also emotionally as well. And in order to address what she's talking about, we decided to bring an example that we found in the Gospel of Luke. Many of us know this passage here, chapter 22, verse 46. So Humberto de Campos, through the mediumship of Chico Xavier, narrates the story about how Jesus had invited 3 of the disciples to go to the mount and pray with him. I don't know if you guys know about this moment. It was John, Peter, and Tiago. Forgot his name, Tiago. In English. James, thank you. 3 disciples only were invited to go and pray with him. So they get there, and Jesus asks them to pray and be vigilant with him. He steps away to pray, and the disciples are there meditating, but then they fall asleep. So a few moments later, Jesus comes and he says, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." Let's imagine that we're meditating, then Marisa walks in, and we're like, my God, we fell asleep. We're supposed to be praying with her. It's the most decisive moment of her existence. It was the most defining moment there for them. So they fall asleep again. Jesus comes back and says, "Wake up. Didn't I tell you to be vigilant? Can't you stay awake with me for just 1 minute? Can't you just stay awake with me for just 1 minute?" They fell asleep in reality 3 times. The rest is history, as we know, because Judas approached with the soldiers and Jesus was taken away. What the Gospels don't tell us, and what Humberto de Campos does tell us, is that after this happened, John was taken by such tremendous guilt. He questioned himself, why couldn't I stay awake with my master? It was the last moment we would have together. Why couldn't I just be awake? It had to be of importance that he only invited the 3 of us. And although he dedicated his life to serving and carrying on the message, every now and then he would feel that little ping of remorse visiting him. One evening, he was in meditation and he started to fall asleep again. It was a different kind of sleep. He was more awake than ever. His spirit noticed a beautiful spirit arriving, filled with light and that sincere and sweet and loving smile that was unforgettable, and it was Jesus. So he opened his heart to Jesus, and Jesus told him that the lesson in reality, among many others, had to do with the fact that sometimes in life it is necessary that we walk alone. We are going to find the indifferences of friends who are asleep to their own reality and those who are around them. The need to be awake with Jesus for just 1 minute has to do with the fact what he's calling us about to do is on a daily basis being truly aware and vigilant to the responsibilities that we have been entrusted with. Now, a lot of people might say, you're talking about Paul, you're talking about Mary, you're talking about Peter. Let us remember that the disciples, 12 of them, were kind of like us. And although we see them in pictures with the halo, they were not saints. They were complicated, they had their own feelings, they had their own emotions, and Jesus trusted them as much as he trusts us. So we know that we are in existence. We know that we have our missions and obligations to fulfill. And it's as if he's asking us yet again to be awake with him for just 1 minute of our day. And that's often what we do not do. But talking about the aspect of finding ourselves sometimes walking alone because we have friends who find themselves awake, asleep within their own indifferences, we have to question if we are the ones who are asleep in indifference for those that are depending on us. And this, my friend, hit really close because we start evaluating. Let's think about this. Sometimes it's in the presence of a family member who just demands too much from us. And it happens. Or a friend, or a situation at work, or even at the Spiritist Center, right? We have, after all, this is a house, and we're full of siblings here who sometimes may not get along very well. But we're talking about the need to be awakened to these obligations that all of us are called upon to ponder on. Joana de Angelis will tell us that for us to be awakened, something truly liberating happens to the soul. Because while some people claim to be powerless over their own lives, the liberating aspect comes from knowing that we are empowered when we are vigilant and seeking assistance in order to be overcoming any difficult situations or seeking assistance for the difficult relationships that we have, or getting the strength to go through an illness, or any of the hardships that does come to us in life. And it's not only when it's a good time that everything is fine, that we can go ahead and hit that snooze button all the time. We have to do the very same thing even when things are going well. She says that it provides discernment. So sometimes in relationships, when she talks about providing discernment between what is right and what is wrong, she says that sacrifices will be asked of us. Sacrifices will be asked of us. We are able to tell between what we should and what we should not do. We could wish to do something, but it might not be the right thing to do. We might hurt someone else. If we step over some boundaries so that we can have what we want, we are remaining numb and asleep to their obligations and realities, because there is such a thing called limit. And when we overcome the limit of someone else and hurt them, then we are not discerning. She brings that an aspect of relating with one another, allowing for deeper understanding about life's situations. Now, we might say, I'm going through something right now, and I just don't understand it. I don't know what God is trying to say. I don't know what the lesson is truly about, but we can really only ponder upon it if we are awake to the lessons. What is it that life is asking of me? What's happening to me at this moment has what significance for my spiritual progress? What is life trying to tell me? Am I awake to hear the warnings from the spirit world? Because sometimes when we are here and we're in this turmoil, we forget that we are in reality surrounded by loving spirits, good spirits who are doing everything they possibly can to encourage us and give us a meaning of our existence that is valuable, that we are divine, that we are light. A work in creation, we may call it that, but they're constantly reminding us, because one of the things that they do see in us, truly awake, is what we are going to become, and not necessarily where we are. So has anybody here read the book 2,000 years ago? So there's a story about this truly proud Senator Publius Lentulus, right? And when Jesus had that conversation with him and told him that it was up to him to follow him at that moment or wait thousands of years for another opportunity, Jesus didn't see a proud senator. He saw him as Emmanuel. And that's how the good spirits see us, waiting for a moment so that we are awake enough to hear what they're trying to say. And that's why all of this provides serenity to deal with the adversities that naturally will come in a world of trials and expiations. If it's tests, It's like we said, we are here. We're going through a test. We are going through a class. We have to pass to go on to the next level. And so what does the professor do? He gives us tests and remains silent. No cheat. Joana de Angelis says that it's wonderful when we awaken here while incarnate, as opposed to waiting to get to the spirit world. Because the feeling of pain is greater in thinking about a wasted time and not doing the things that we in reality had to do. And it's never late to begin. And we may have moments where we might falter, where we might fall down. But it's always time to start again. Every new day is an opportunity to begin again, to try again, to practice that which we're having such a hard time with. And that is the beautiful thing about reincarnation. If we were to consider reading the book Missionaries of the Light and seeing the planning that goes behind each reincarnation individually, we would find the worth that our life truly has, not just for us, but those that invested so much on our behalf. And we're talking about investments, we're saying that the greatest proof of love from God is an opportunity to be reincarnated, even with those who test our patience so much as we find in our own family members or friends. We're going to show a video right now from, just to finalize our study today, from somebody who was able to completely overcome all of the adversities in life and be truly awakened to what life had called from a very early age for him to do. He contemplated committing suicide when he was 8 years old, and he often questioned why God had punished him so severely. So we're talking about Nick, that Australian speaker, motivator who has no arms, no legs. And we are going to find some key characteristics of how he deals with life that we can apply at our own in being awakened to what we are supposed to do. So I don't know if you want to shut the lights off. And there are subtitles in Portuguese. You can follow along. Gratefulness, of being thankful for what we have and not wishing for the things that we didn't, so that we can partake actively on what we do have. Now, he didn't share there, but he did ask at a moment in his existence, why, God, did you do this to me? In one moment where he was praying and crying, and he heard, so that you could be my hands and legs on earth. Now here's a person who's not a spiritist, but he is religious. Religiousness, the aspect of religion truly getting inside the heart so that he can go out and assist others. He talked about the need of feeling the worth, our worth. Sometimes we live existing thinking that nobody cares. We are invisible, but not to them. So being fully aware, being fully awakened to this reality of divine essence that we all carry within. He has a sense of humor. Now, we don't need to suffer all the time. I had a friend who used to come to the Spiritist Center. He said, Spiritists love to suffer. You have to suffer to evolve. We don't have to suffer to evolve. But sometimes painful situations are going to come our way. And how we suffer is going to determine how we're going to live. In the aspect of illnesses, we have to be fully aware and mindful of how we're thinking about ourselves, about life, and what we are attracting, and how our physical body and cells are responding to the feelings that we are daily employing. A moment of gratefulness brings about health. It brings about a new reality of being awakened to the responsibilities that we are all filled with. We all have many important responsibilities. Now, what they may be, the question that Joana de Angelis tells us to ask, what are we doing? What do we want? What are we destined to? And what matters do I attend to? Are questions that we tonight should be able to answer. And they might change. They might change. Because new responsibilities come up. And that's the beautiful thing of it as well. But one of the things that we wanted to bring with this phrase from Paul, somebody who had the authority, because he considered himself to be asleep for a long, long time before being awakened by that truly great light of truth, is that we can opt to stay numb, to stay asleep, to live our lives as if we are dead, naturally counting every single day, or we can rise from the dead, as he says, and allow Christ to shine his light upon us and see more clearly what it is that our life is about. So with that, I thank you for listening. I don't know if you're open for questions. Okay. And Mauro can answer all the questions that you might have. Okay. Thank you so much for your attention.